Hey everybody, welcome to Relationship Matters. Well, welcome everybody to Relationship Matters LiveCast. And guess what? It's the season finale. It's the last one of the season. And boy, am I excited for my guest today, Chris McDonald. I'll introduce him in a minute. But just want to welcome you all as you're jumping on here or listening to the podcast later or watching it later. Just want to welcome you. Thanks for the support through this season, especially to all you regulars who have been consistently commenting and asking questions and just being part of the conversation. And I'm still amazed at how many people will say to me later that I had no idea watched it, and they'll just say, hey, I really enjoyed that episode or this episode. So I started this to start a relationship conversation because I believe everything flows out of relationship. And if we can get our relationships healthy with God, with ourselves, and with others, we're going to see actually flourishing come to our life. We're going to see peace and contentment and purpose be lived out. And so that's why I started this thing, and that's why I continue with it. It's based on my book that I wrote called Relationship Matters, but we're going to continue to expand it. There'll be some new things next season that and new guests, and it's just going to be fantastic. Also, through the summer, I want to just encourage you to keep your eyes open. I'm going to be doing a joint project with somebody, a friend of mine, that's called Relationship Mailbag. And we're going to be taking questions this summer and then talking and answering those specific questions about relationships. And we're just going to do that in this kind of format. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So I want to encourage you to check that out when you see me. I'll start announcing it in the next few weeks or so. But for today, it's our last episode. And I want to introduce you to Chris McDonald. Chris was born on the East Coast to a fisherman family. He grew up on the farming prairies of Alberta and now lives with his wife, Angela, and two young adult children in West Coast city of Nanaimo, coast to coast, right? Chris is passionate about two things: handcrafted coffee, my wife will agree with you on that, and helping others to live out their best lives here and now. With an education background in counseling, therapy, and currently a co-vocational practitioner, Chris offers professional therapeutic counseling services to the public, as well as provide spiritual care as a lead pastor for the local Nanaimo church called Beloved. It's a great church, by the way, Beloved. Whether one is walking through addiction, needing assistance or conflict resolution, or simply looking to build new skills in reducing worry and anxiety, Chris utilizes a holistic approach to helping others on their journey to discover health and wholeness. Aside from working, you'll often find Chris at the local cafe or outside exploring the beautiful West Coast. And I know you love the outdoor stuff. So welcome, Chris. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Mark. It's such an honor to be online with you today. I'm so privileged to be here. I'm thankful to just be able to chat with you about relationships. Love it, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So Chris and I know each other for quite a few years now, and have gotten to know each other. We met at a camp, actually, a summer camp, and I was just really taken by his family, and I love that he lives out a lot of the principles I teach. I see it lived out within their family, them and their two young adult children, and so I just have always had a high regard for you, Chris, because I see you living out the principles that you teach and that you help with people with, and so not too long ago, Chris and I we're in the same kind of a leadership mastermind, if you will, cohort. And we each take turns and bring something to the rest of the people. And it's just a great time. And but one time recently, about a month ago or more, Chris actually brought something to the table that blew my mind. And so I wanted to have him on here to talk about this idea of receiving. So many people struggle with receiving things from others can from all over the place, right? Like receiving criticism, receiving
Yeah.
kindness, receiving encouragement, receiving help, asking for help. It's so difficult for us, and it seems like it's getting worse as even coming through COVID and with mental health struggles. It a lot of people feel isolated, and so they don't know that they can reach out and ask for help, or they don't think that anybody cares enough to listen. And so today we want to talk about this idea of empowering your relationships through learning how to receive better. And I often say that I became a better giver. I became more generous when I learned how to receive, when I was put in a position where I had to receive help. And so, Chris, can you just unfold a little bit of that for us? Where did it come from? How did you come to this thing? Because it's fairly new to you too. You realized something in your own life was off.
Yeah.
So share with
Yeah.
us.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. And thanks for the introduction, Mark. Thank you so much. Obviously during COVID just revealed so many cracks, even in my own character. And even as a professional in the industry and working with relationships and working with people who face anxiety or face, social anxiety, predominantly is what I've been finding often. COVID just revealed that in so many different ways. Even though we were doing online counseling over this last couple of years, it feels like. But I realized it became a real personal thing for me during COVID, realizing that, you give so much as a leader or as a professional or as a practitioner. You feel like you're giving. And we often talk about giving from an empty cup and examining how are we renewing ourselves? How are we filling ourselves, whether it be through hobbies, whether it be through refresh. Like for me, it's a coffee and a book. I love refreshing and revitalizing myself through that process. I like to revitalize myself alone too. But I've also realized that so during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, almost feeling like I was tired and exhausted mentally more so than physically, I was sitting there one day and I was talking to my wife and I said, we have a problem with receiving. And she's like, what? What do you mean? I'm like, yeah, I think we actually have a problem with receiving. We love to give. We feel good about giving. This is, so I started to do some research around giving as Canadians. Canadians love to give. They're generous. They like to open the door. They like to pay it forward at the Tim Hortons lineup, whatever that might look like. Right. This is who we are as Canadians. And so I did some looking and just to see what is the statistics around giving as Canadians. And I learned some significant things about how one of them was Canadians give 1.6 of their income to charity every year. We've also learned that people age 55 plus gave $6.9 billion to charity in Canada. This is through Canada Helps. You can find these really basic. There are 30,000 plus charitable organizations in Canada alone. And that's not just churches, it's healthcare, animal foundations, education, social services, environmental services. And so we'd love to give, honestly, and it's pretty apparent around us in our relationship. We're actually blessed as a country to be able to bless others. But I do really feel, and for myself personally, feel that we have a problem with receiving. So receiving, as you said, receiving help, reaching out to receive. And so I find, even for myself, what I was finding is that because I have this problem with receiving, or I almost resist receiving, I'm therefore running on empty and no longer able to keep giving. So that's where it started personally for me, my own journey. It's been a great journey to recognize, okay, well, great. That's what we want to do, is recognize the problem and then start mitigating the problem. And so that's what I've been working through. And it's actually helped me be a better helper in the industry that I work in as well.
Yeah, of course, because I think when you learn you see the value of receiving, then you start to realize how valuable giving is. It's in some ways, I think a lot of those stats are amazing. But I think a lot of people give for something within themselves. It's actually not necessarily compassion driven. Sometimes it's the motivation is to be seen or to show that they're giving back, especially companies, right? They always want, I remember, because of course I've run charities and I've run nonprofits, and a lot of times they wanted to know what their return on investment was going to be. And it's like, right. Kids are going to be helped, but that wasn't good enough. They wanted to know how we were going to show that they gave this support. And I think that a lot of times there's something in us that we want to give to make ourselves feel better. But that's not really a powerful place to come from. It's good. Nothing wrong with that. Hey, we want to feel good. Let's give. But I think there's a deeper level if we learn the value of receiving and what it feels like to be able to, in a crisis, to receive from someone encouragement, help, whatever. I think it actually really empowers your giving. Now it's not about me anymore. It's actually about them. And so that comes to mind for me with what you just said.
Yeah, I think in some ways, we've almost disempowered ourselves because of the influences that we've had in the past. Maybe it be a faithing background or just, old school methodologies and thought processes around parenting. Maybe it would be more noble to give than to receive. Some of those influences that, we've all grown up with, and I personally have too. And somehow I think that it was a lesson to safeguard ourselves from becoming narcissistic or being self-centered or self-indulgent monsters. So we really try to protect ourselves by give, so that I'm not selfish, so that I'm not self-centered.
Right.
And I think obviously what's happening is we're detracting from the ability to allow other people to be human and us to be in a posture to receive and allow those other people to give and not just us always giving. So we're allowing ourselves to have that interconnectivity, that mutuality. So I think it's just a beautiful thing to explore, because humanity in our self-centered, self-indulgent processes, almost independent way of thinking is actually protecting ourselves, but it's actually not protecting us. It's withholding others and withholding our own abilities from growing, from other people's experiences, from other people being able to help us. Yeah, but I think a lot of past experiences and a lot of past influences are contributing to, as we know already, that's how we learn from our past. But anyway.
Yeah. So I want to just say to the viewers, if you have a question or you want to, we want you to join our conversation. So if you have any thoughts and contributions, please put them in the comments. They come right into the studio here and we can share them. And I'd love to hear from you. So please give us some feedback and join the conversation. So Chris, I think one of the things that you talked about that I'd like you just to share on is one of the reasons we don't, or maybe I should ask you, what are some of the reasons that we don't receive? One that I remember you talking about is vulnerability. Maybe you could jump on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's some amazing things that we can learn from this study, and vulnerability is one of those things that if we are unable to be in a posture of receiving, to be a recipient of something, then we are actually not allowing ourselves to be real, authentic, and vulnerable, because we all, as human beings, we need to be able to receive. We need to be able to receive compliments, to receive love and affirmation, to even receive feedback, whether it be positive or what we might call negative feedback, but critiques in some ways. And those are really important things to look at, because if we don't allow ourselves to be in that posture of receiving or as a recipient, then we're actually not able to be in a vulnerable posture. And I think that's so key in relationships, because without vulnerability, then there's not an ability to have authenticity as well in our relationships. And obviously we already know that we want authenticity in our relationships. To be able to be real means I'm going to put myself out there to also be hurt or to be critiqued. And so if I'm unable to receive, then I'm both unable to be vulnerable, thus unable to be authentic at the same time. So it's a real big problem in relationships.
Yeah, I mean, in my book, I say the 5 pillars of a healthy foundation. One of them is trust, and one of the ways you gain trust is through transparency and vulnerability. Yes. And the other one, another pillar is actually authenticity. And so you're like literally taking 2 underpinnings out from your relationship for a healthy foundation when you're not able to receive from someone else.
Yes.
So what are some of the reasons that people can't receive that you've witnessed in counseling or in your experience?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I find really interesting about relationships, because we're in relationships because, especially if they're romantic or whatever, we're in a relationship because we want intimacy. But one of the biggest problems that we face with receiving is it's actually, when we don't receive, we're actually defending against intimacy. Because that would be receiving is creating connection, right? So if we're preventing ourselves from receiving, then we're preventing ourselves from receiving intimacy as well, and that's going to create a further deeper problem. But see, prioritizing giving over receiving is a way to keep people distant and our hearts defended. So that's protecting ourselves in those vulnerable situations, and so we're protecting ourselves. But to the extent that we actually begin to fear intimacy, because again, we want to keep that wall of protection that's there, and then we're actually disallowing ourselves from receiving a gift or a compliment or that intimacy, which then is depriving ourselves of the precious moment of connection that intimacy and relationship is all about. So again, right. It goes beyond even just having inauthenticity. Then you're actually robbing yourself and others of having that meaningful connection and real deep intimacy, because you have to be able to receive in order to have intimacy in a relationship. It can't just be a one-way street, right? Yeah. So the things we're actually defending ourselves against intimacy when we don't receive. So that's one big problem, I think, in relationships for sure.
Wow. That's so good, Chris, because it just really, I'm sure people are thinking right now, like, oh, that's why I'm having a hard time connecting with my wife, because we defend against that in some ways. And some of that comes because we maybe have received negative feedback or criticism. Yes. I know one of the things a man needs is honor and respect. The thing women need is love and security. So when we don't provide those for each other, then we turn off that vulnerability. We get hurt. Now we're not going to receive anything from them. So the problem with not receiving, here's my issue. The problem with not receiving criticism or feedback is that then I will eventually turn off the need to actually receive intimacy or receive love. And because it's I always tell people, if you turn the negative emotions off, you turn the good ones off too. You can't select. Yeah. So talk a little bit into that a little bit, Chris, because I think you're hitting on something, a deep root right now for people. So let's just expand on that a little bit if you can.
Yeah, and that's exactly true, Mark, is when you turn off the ability to receive negative feedback because maybe it hurts or it's painful. And that's one of the things that we struggle as humans as we try to protect ourselves from hurting. And maybe because our culture around us, maybe our society, maybe it's just past experiences, we're really prone to seek comfort. And so when we seek comfort, then we will avoid pain. But unfortunately, and pain can come in all kinds of different ways. It can be hurt, it could be offense, it could be just irritation even sometimes in a relationship, or doubt, fear, mixed messages, all these different things that we get in communication and relationships. And but without being able to ask questions in a relationship so that you can receive feedback about how someone's feeling or how what you did made that person. I mean, you can't make someone feel something, but how they feel from what you did per se, without being able to have that intimacy and that connection grow. First off, you have to be able to receive feedback before you can actually give feedback or even give love or intimacy away or give affirmation away, because without receiving, then that communication starts to break down as well, right? And then you don't understand what's going on in that person's life, what's going on in their thoughts and emotions and behaviors. So the defense against intimacy, in order to reverse that, receiving creates connection. So learning how, if you want connection in your relationship, you have to learn how to receive first before you can give. And that's just so contrary and contrasting to how many of us are raised, right? We give first and receive second. And maybe there's some truth to that obviously too, but I think the problem is that we just stop ourselves from receiving altogether because it's a safe place to be. And yet it's not a safe place to be for very long.
Yeah, that's so good, Chris. That's so good. Thanks, Susan. Susan says, does love languages fit into this?
That's really good. Love languages. I love it. Yeah, I think so. Absolutely, Mark. And I'm sure you would have lots of thoughts on that too. It's been a while since I read the 5 love languages, but I know one of them is gift giving, words of affirmation. You probably could fill in a few more.
Yeah, words of affirmation, touch, and time spent, and random acts of kindness.
Yes.
Or service. Yeah.
I think it's extremely important actually to understand, especially in an intimate relationship, how one another gives and receives, because otherwise I know in my own life, I'm married for 20 some odd years now. And I'm still learning how to my wife's love language. And sometimes I'm still way off track because I'm giving what I want to give or how I want to receive. And so, yeah, I think it's a big part of reconnecting, being well.
Yeah, I think it feeds into what you were saying earlier, because think about those love languages, they all need to be received to be experienced. So
Yes.
follow-up question, Sue asked, how do you understand and receive someone's communication? Well, that's a great question, because if somebody, for example, speaks in your love language, let's say it's gifts, and you refuse the gift because you're mad
Right.
at them, you're angry at them, then you've now actually sabotaged love.
Yeah.
And then you complain that, oh, you never loved me, you never showed me love. Well, I
Yes.
did, but you keep rejecting it. So because we can't receive, we're not able to actually, and I tell you, I know from myself, when I give and it's received, it creates connection.
Yes.
And when I receive and someone else gives, they feel connection. And
Yes.
so I think that's really good. That's a great question. So
Absolutely. I think that's a really important thing to understand, is that, and as part of the communication breakdown often in relationships is that we jump to conclusions. We get into those thought traps, jump to conclusions, catastrophize, black and white thinking, a lot of those different thought traps that we right away go to. And then again, we prevent ourselves even further from actually being vulnerable, from being able to receive, because we go back into our mind. And we can't get out of our minds and into our bodies and actually express and receive love through touch and gifts, etc. Yeah, I think it's a powerful opportunity to just reflect on our relationships and how we communicate, and how we're both receiving and giving communication, whether it be not all talk, but even how we, with bodily and eye contact, and some phenomenal things to work through.
Yeah, because Sue, I thought this was good too. Sue said, it can be difficult to read a person's communication unless you do the work to understand each other. And I agree with that. I would say that starts, Sue, because your first question was, how do you understand and receive someone's communication, is to actually work on yourself and understand your own, how you receive things. See, if you've been hurt, if you've been wounded in a relationship, then your receivers are off. Think of a receiver like a radio channel. So when you have a receiver, what does a receiver do? Well, it captures a frequency. And so when you're in a relationship, those frequencies are off and your receiver is off, then it doesn't matter what the partner does. It doesn't matter what the other person does. You're never going to receive it because your receiver is off. It's not tuned in to the right channel. And so the first place you start is to work on your own ability to receive, your own ability to hear the other person. I think asking questions is one way to go deeper. I always say asking questions de-escalates, making statements escalates. And so, what do you think of that? What would be a communication piece that would help people receive? Is there any tips you got on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the funniest, simplest things that we have a problem with is receiving compliments. So, and kind words, gratitude shown towards you. Often we squirm, we feel awkward, and we say like, "Oh, it's no big deal," or someone says, "I love you," or gives you a gift, and what do we say? You didn't have to. I've done this so many times and I still myself sometimes saying these things. Hey, I love you. I love it when you do that. Oh gosh, darn it. Our little responses, it's no big deal. These are indicators that it's really difficult for us to receive love, care, and nurture, affirmation. Right. Our responses are a key indicator on how willing we are to receive. So if you find yourself in that, and I sometimes still do, when someone does something that's really special, I'm like, oh man, you shouldn't, you didn't have, and then I'm like, wait a second. And it's like, first off, I'm robbing myself of that intimate connection, but I'm also robbing them of having that intimate connection. So it's not just about me, it's about both of us now in this mutual. And so that's one of the simplest things I've realized is like my response mechanisms are going to be a key indicator in how well I am actually able to receive.
That's so good, Chris. You hit it right on the head. That is such great information for people to understand, right? Like to know those indicators, right? Like if it's hard and awkward, and boy, I'm with you. I still do it. It's almost like a false humility, but it's because you're feeling awkward about receiving something. But you are so right, because you're robbing the other person of connection by doing that. What's wrong with just saying thank you?
Yeah.
Thank you. I received that. Thank you so much. I so appreciate your thought there.
Yeah. And I think that would create a conversation at that point too, rather than both of us being awkward now.
Yeah.
What happens, right? Because then they got to defend why they did it, or it's just, we're robbing ourselves as humanity, we're robbing ourselves of intimate connection when we don't receive.
Yeah, it's so true. What are some
Yeah.
other things that why people don't receive?
Yeah,
You can think of.
Why it's often harder or more difficult than giving is because it's hard for us to let go of control. When we give control, and we love being in control, right? Like, it's just, we want to control our time schedules, we control our calendars, we control who comes over to our house, we control everything in our lives. It's about being secure and comfortable, and so we control a lot of things, and so that's also, we're controlling our ability to receive. And when we give, we're in control in a certain way. It might be easier to offer a kind word or buy someone flowers, but can we in those moments allow ourselves to surrender to the good feeling of receiving gifts? So often, I don't know, it depends on your love language, but even if you don't have a love language of gift giving, and I find what's funny, Mark, is people who often have the gift or the love language of gift giving are not often gift receivers. They don't really care about getting gifts. Something funny about our humanity, but to the extent of, can we allow ourselves to surrender to the good feeling of receiving a gift? How do we respond when someone gives us a gift? Do we feel out of control? Do we feel, again, awkward like earlier? But letting go of control is a big deal in our humanity. We want to grip onto control, and it is affecting our ability to receive.
Wow, that's so powerful. Because it's true. I'm thinking about so many scenarios right now where, when you've been wounded and you have trauma from a childhood, you want to control your environment. And when somebody shows kindness to you, and your limiting belief underneath is that you don't deserve it, or that you shouldn't have it, or that they're going to want something from you because of it, then it limits your ability to receive it. And so, boy, is that ever an indicator? If people say, well, I don't have to be in control, but they can't receive, I'm sorry, but you do have control issues. Because you can't receive, you have to be on the giving end. And by the way, on people that can't receive and need to be in control by giving, I find there's always condition to the giving. I find that it's not a pure give. It's not really giving. It's actually manipulating, or it's trying to. It's a transaction. It's transactional. They want an exchange, so they want to thank you. They want a recognition somehow. And when they don't get it, they're offended. And so,
the expectations are unmet. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. By disallowing ourselves to receive a gift or a compliment is actually depriving ourselves of a precious moment of connection, is what it's doing. Again, receiving actually invites us to welcome a vulnerable part of ourselves, and sometimes we don't want that vulnerability because it's unsafe. That again, I'm out of control when I'm in those moments, and it's a fearful place to be. And it's something that I know from different experiences, that opening myself up slowly, or allowing life to gradually allow me to process these things and process these environments that I'm in. And it's not something you can just jump into. I totally understand that. It's something to relearn and have the grace for ourselves in that as well. But letting go of control is receiving invites us to welcome that vulnerable part of ourselves. Then we're able to receive again, and then it's creating that interconnectivity again, and that's so really important. I would say that sometimes when we give from a posture of control, are we really giving from a generous heart? And it comes back to just the first point of letting go of control. When we give, we're in control. But we can reverse that by receiving and inviting reception in our life to welcome those gifts, to welcome vulnerability. It's like a tender place. We're more available to receive the gifts that were offered. Maybe it might not be a tangible gift, maybe just gifts of affirmation. It might be gifts of encouragement, or even a critique, which again, it would be really hard in this if you're letting go of control is the problem. But it might just be a sincere thank you. That's a gift, right? Like a smile is a gift. And sometimes we're just like, I don't know about you, Mark, but sometimes when I'm in Tim Hortons and I'm kind of in my isolation zone, I'm in my head, I'm not really in the space that I want to be, maybe whatever that, and someone looks at me and smiles, you avert eyes so fast because you don't want to receive that gift.
Yeah, because if I smile back, they're going to come over and talk to me, and they're going to waste my time. And yet we don't know. That person might bring something to our lives that we never would have dreamt of. I received a dinner invitation recently, with some people, and I know one in particular well, and a couple of others, just getting to know them. But I would be the odd, like I would normally feel awkward in a setting. I'm relational, but I'm not social, and so. But I received the invitation because I was honored that I got invited, and I wanted to honor them by receiving it. And I got to tell you, it was one of the most impactful nights I've had in a while. They spoke right into my life. They challenged me. It was just a beautiful evening. If I had rejected that, I would not have gotten it, And so that's interesting. Susan asks, should you not have expectations, but be happy we can give joy to someone? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think if you have expectations, then it's not joy you're bringing. It's a negotiation. It's a transaction. Yes. So that's a good question. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of social versus relational piece. Just it reminded me when I said I'm not social. Right. How does that play into this receiving thing?
Yeah, I think it probably plays in a few different ways. But I think what I've been in this season with, leading small groups, I lead, group therapy groups. I run groups through our church. I run, I'm in social environments quite often. And I've noticed that, again, this problem of receiving is related or linked to people seeking social connections rather than relational connections. And so social would be like, it's fun. I can check in. I can check out when I want. So again, that's being in control again. Fear of strings attached, which we didn't really talk about much yet, but there's when we move to relational, there's expectations that all of a sudden seem to be attached in a string-like way, that they're going to want something from me or whatever it might be. But yeah, I'm finding that quite often. And I think this is where a lot of our social anxieties are coming from as well, is in this, I'm not sure what you would call it. It's not really a myth, but being in social environments is what most people think that they want, but what they're actually craving inside is intimate, vulnerable connection, which requires relationship. And that's maybe it's because it's hard. I don't know. You probably know more than me, but in some of this area, is it hard work that we're resisting? I don't know. But yeah, that social anxiety often stems from the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of being real, the fear of being made fun of, the fear of looking stupid or sounding stupid. And so we walk into these social environments, and we walk in and we develop these social anxieties because we have a fear of actually developing relationships, and we're robbing ourselves of being human.
Wow. That's so powerful. I can see that being played out many different ways. And what you end up with is actually a shallow, something shallow that doesn't really touch the heart of the matter and doesn't really help you, because social is like, sure, if you're social, you enjoy the energy of other people and you're outgoing and you're a personality, whatever you're, sure, you're going to get some life from that. But it's actually that, I think you hit it right on the head. It's that deeper desire for connection that is why we enjoy the social. And and I think that, in fact, you could use socialization as a weapon to not get close to people.
Yes.
Like, you know a lot of people a little bit, but you don't know anybody well. And I think that is a form of self-protecting. Yes. And I think it's one thing you didn't mention is, I think it's a fear of pain. It's a fear of being hurt. And I think sometimes then we try and keep it all on the surface. But for those of us that are part of organizations or part of like church life and whatnot, part of communities of any kind, it's like we cannot have that connection need met without relationship, without depth of relationship. Yeah,
I think it's for me in my environments, it's a pretty big deal. Just like as I've been exploring this more problem of receiving in my life and in my professional career, I'm realizing that, wait a second, there's a real major link to why we're lonely, even when we're with people. When we're isolated, even though we're Facebook friends or whatever it might be, it's because we actually have this problem of receiving connection, receiving intimacy, receiving whatever it might be, right? And so receiving is ultimately the problem with our social versus relational environments, is because if you're noticing that, I'm going into these social things, I'm going to meet with friends, I'm going to church, I'm going to these community events, and I'm still lonely and I'm still feeling isolated at home, it's because there's not relational, intimate connections that are growing. And there's a few of these things that we were talking about today. The defense against intimacy, receiving creates, so problem with receiving creates connections. So recreate those connections, letting go of control. When we give, we are in control. So being able to receive gifts, affirmation, smiles, thanks, whatever.
Yeah, that's so good. Just want to say hi to Carrie. Made a comment there, thanking us for being there and blessing both of us. So thank you, Carrie. Really appreciate that. I've known that Carrie his whole life, literally. And so, yeah, I think you're hitting on something so important here. That's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I don't think people connect the dots. That I got to protect myself. I can't let myself be hurt in any way. And yet, I was telling a client yesterday, the more you try to not be hurt, the more you invite hurt.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if you avoid conflict because you have a fear of pain, then you're actually going to see more conflict come into your life, because your perception of conflict is skewed, it's wrong. And so, I use the quote by Max Lucado, conflict's inevitable, combat is optional. So you don't have to have combat just because you have a conflict. The conflict is simply, we don't have an agreement on something. Let's talk through it till we can either agree to disagree or to make an agreement. And I think that without the ability to receive from one another, whether it is criticism, even if if somebody says something to me and it's maybe misrepresented me, they've not read my heart correctly, it's an opportunity. Like I want to know that. So if I can receive what they're saying, because I want to know if that, and then I can take responsibility and say, hey, I'm sorry if that's the relational message I sent. It's not what I intended. Here's my heart. So it's giving me an opportunity to express my heart, rather than just having them hold a grudge against me and kind of freeze me out because I couldn't receive their criticism. And so I think that comes into play. Is there any other reasons that we don't receive?
For sure. One of the ones
I know the answer.
One of the ones that is fears of strings attached. Whenever we think of receiving, we right away tell ourselves a story or believe, maybe from past experiences, because we have had relationships that had expectations that were unable to be met. And so there's all kinds of disappointment and discouragement that comes from that. But often we fear of strings attached. And we may be uncomfortable receiving, if it comes with strings attached, it's never fun, right? And so when you're growing up and you received compliments only when you accomplished something, so looking back at childhood or maybe your first marriage, or maybe we may have received compliments only when we actually did something that the other person wanted or liked. Maybe it's like excelling at sports or achieving good grades as a child. But there's always this, it's tinged by the continuing need to perform is what happens, which is obviously a distasteful thing in our lives, whether it be in our relationships or whether it be in our sports or jobs. If we're only able to receive when there's no strings attached, then unfortunately we're again protecting ourselves from actually being able to receive in any one of these postures. As soon as you put any one of these walls up, you begin to wall off the opportunity to receive at all. And so it's not just one that we might struggle with. When we struggle with one, we'll struggle with them all, and we'll just make sure that wall is up there good and proper, right? So it's our primal brain responding, right? Our fear mechanisms that are kicking in, so it's preventing us from actually having a rationalization or the thinking brain being engaged, right? And like you said, we're qualifying your critics. If you didn't like that criticism, then qualify the critique or the criticizer or the criticism, and see, is there any truth in this, right? And start engaging rational brain, and then my primal brain, those fear mechanisms will start to reduce as I start to rationalize what's actually going on, right? So the strings attached from past experiences, we need to rationalize those fears of those strings or expectations. I mean, and from my experience and the experience of others, I mean, if parents and or caregivers narcissistically used you or used your grades or used your accomplishments to meet their own needs, to showcase their, or maybe you had a girlfriend or a boyfriend that was like that, then we equate to being used. And that's a fear of a string attached. So if someone compliments us, those emotions are going to be tied to memories of where people have done that in the past. And those are things that have to be worked through, right? Maybe we were recognized for what we do rather than for who we really are. And so we carry those fears. And so when someone gives us a compliment, we right away start thinking, what do they expect of me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So good. So good. Yeah. Well, and you know what? We got to look at the brain science of this, because a lot of people don't understand. They don't know why they're rejecting that receiving. They don't know what's going on. And just by giving this awareness to them today in this show, like, I really encourage you, if this is hitting home for you, share this video out, because people need to hear this information. There's somebody that might get if you share this video, somebody may see it that absolutely needed to understand this. Because listen, there's a crisis, there's a pandemic of broken relationships in this world right now, and it breaks my heart, and I know it breaks Chris's heart. And so we have to have these conversations, Chris. Like, that's such good information, because what happens is, if it's repeated in our lives, our neuroplasticity in our brain will actually program it to believe that. But here's a good thing, because we build a belief system around it then, that people are just out to get us. And so we're going to be on defensive all the time, right? But here's the good news. If you create a neuroplasticity in the first place, you can actually renew that and change the neuroplasticity to the positive. You can actually train your brain. I always say you want to train your brain to be hardwired to what God says you are, to who he says you are, not to who those people who took advantage of you say you are. And so I just think it's so important, this conversation, that you bring up these things. Thank you so much, Chris. Is there anything else? Is there another reason we don't receive?
Yeah, and I think we touched on this briefly, but it is one major category, is we believe it's selfish to receive. And then the fifth one, time to touch on it's great, but the fifth one is really important too, is there's a self-imposed pressure to reciprocate. Again, it kind of goes in with just, it is one of the problems with receiving, is we believe that we have to reciprocate everything that comes our way, right? So, but the selfishness to receive is something that, I guess, is back to that worldview. But I think the problem with this is when we believe it's selfish to receive and we receive, then we feel shame. And we know shame is a killer of relationship, a killer of just our ability to be healthy and whole in a lot of different ways. And so I think there's just a lot of misinformation, myths around it being as selfish to receive. But yet at the same time, what you're doing when you're receiving is you're allowing humans to be human. And we all need to be like humans. We all need to feel appreciated. We all need to be able to express our love language, per se. And those are really, it's a big deal. So selfishness to receive, definitely a problem.
Yeah. I remember growing up, funny story. No, not funny, haha, but funny, interesting. My dad was a missionary, and then when he came home, Jim Pattison used to give him a new Pontiac every year. And the first time, like, I think it went for 4 years or something, and then Dad moved and took a pastorate somewhere else, and the car stopped. But my dad didn't want to receive it. He couldn't receive it. He says, too much. And I remember as a kid overhearing him say, this is just too big of a gift. This is, and what are people going to say? Like, I remember him talking to my mom saying, people are going to think that we're something's wrong with us, right? That we're too highfalutin to be missionaries, and they're going to think we have. And it was in an era when being poor was noble, or being. So I just remember hearing that, and I realized growing up that I was do that too. I remember times when somebody would try and give me a toy or give me something, and my parents would say, "Oh no, you can't receive that. Give it back to them." And so I think a lot of times we've been conditioned to think that way, that it is selfish to receive, and yet it could be one of the most generous things you do, because you're allowing, someone else to speak into your life. In fact, thanks, Roberta, for so much for your comment. Scripture says that it's better to give than receive. That means there needs to be people to receive the giving. We forgot that can be us, and I like that comment. It's true. But like I was saying at the top, I didn't learn how to be a good giver or generous until I learned I was put in a position where we had to receive, where
Yeah.
we had to receive. If we hadn't received, we wouldn't have been able to feed our family. We wouldn't have been able to do some stuff. When our house burned down,
Yeah.
uh, it was a very awkward. Everybody, like, we had enough given to us that we could have filled 5 houses with furniture. And I remember this story. There was somebody in our building who was just renters, and they did not have insurance. And so we offered them a pile of this stuff that was coming to us because I was a pastor at the time in the city, and everybody knew me. So other churches were giving, and I remember they said, "Well, we can't receive that from you." And I said, "No, we want you to have it." And they're, "No, we just can't receive it." And I remember that they were very vocal in their anger and disappointment with this fire and how things were handled, and they were just miserable. And I was thinking, man, if they could have just received
Yeah.
that overflow of my blessings, they would have
Yeah.
been so much better off in their mental case and in their heart. And I just
Yes.
thought it was so pronounced that they could not receive these gifts that were being given anyway. So we ended up
Yeah.
distributing them to all kinds of different places to make sure they got to the needy. And
Yeah.
so, because we just didn't have anywhere to put it yet because we were out for 2 years.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Wow.
it's interesting that it is better to give than receive. But I think we got to remember also that God gives to us. And
Yeah.
if we can't receive from him, we're not going to be able to give to others. And so that's the
Yeah.
first place. I think that gets cut off when we stop receiving. We cut God's blessings off. Then we're not going to bless others. We're not going to let that flow through us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's a conversation at another time maybe, but at the same time, there is a problem with being a taker only. But
Yes.
Something to explore is, what does it mean just to be a taker and not, I think we need to be in a rhythm of giving and receiving, or receiving and giving, however you wanted to put it. But it's interesting how generosity is always looked at as just a giving. And it's actually a very generous act of me too, to be able to receive the generosity of someone else, because I'm being generous with my heart, generous with my vulnerability, generous with my being present in the moment to let someone else be a human and receive their humanity. So it's just interesting how we think of these things.
Yeah. It is. And I think, Roberta there said, when we receive, it's not always the end destination.
Right. Yes.
We're a pass through. I really like that thought, Roberta. It's like, we're just a pass through. People,
Yeah.
when we cut off, if we can't receive, then we don't have something to give. And then we think, oh my goodness, I wonder how many times we become the stopping place for things that really God wants to do, or others, that of spreading that. That's really good. A really good thought as well. We got to stop looking at it as selfishness and start looking at it as provision.
Yeah.
And so, what do I do with this provision? I know when Sandy and I, for many years in ministry, lived by faith, we didn't even have a salary. And I remember when money would come in, it would always be, hard to know, like, do we spend it? Do we save it? Because we don't know when the next dollar is coming.
Yes.
And we decided to take the position to just ask. And we would just, pray and ask, hey, what do we do with this? What's it for? And sometimes it was for someone else, and sometimes it was for us. And so we started to live that lifestyle, and that was where we had to receive. That's where I learned how to receive. And then I realized, just like Roberta said, that I was a conduit. Sometimes it wasn't for me. I wasn't the final destination. Cool story. We had somebody that gave us $20 once, and right away, my wife and I, felt like we were to give it to someone else, that we were just supposed to be the conduit for it. So we actually got it to the person and gave it to them. In the mail the next day came a check for $200.
Wow.
To our mail. And I remember thinking about that. That's not a big deal in itself, except for the fact that it was put on our heart to give that only $20 we had away. But the 200 was already on its way because it was mailed. It would have been several days in the mail system before it gets to us. And so it was just interesting to me. It was like, that is just the way it works. You got to trust the process. Just stay generous, but be generous with receiving, and then you're going to start to see a multiplication start to take place.
Yeah, I think it's so healthy to, when you're examining what's my rhythm of giving and receiving, or receiving and giving, however you feel comfortable saying it, being able to explore that as a part of your generosity is actually having the rhythm. The rhythm's got to be there. Otherwise, you'll be empty, have nothing to give, or you're only taking and taking and taking, and unable to actually allow yourself and others to feel human through that interaction.
Right. How do you know the difference, Chris? How could somebody listening, let's do some practical stuff here. We got 10 minutes left. What are some ways people can start to receive in a healthy way, and then know the difference between whether this is just selfishness or whether it's generosity?
Yeah. Well, I think the difference between even just recognizing the difference between being a receiver and a taker is when we disallow ourselves from receiving in a deeply felt way, our longing actually doesn't disappear. We still have a deep longing to receive. Like I was saying earlier, we have this deep longing for intimate connection. And so when we're in a crowd and still feel lonely, that's a key indicator that I'm not receiving. I'm not in a posture of receiving. So we're disallowing ourselves to receive in a deeply felt and meaningful way. And our longing has not disappeared. But what happens is our longing, it often curdles into something much more demanding. We begin evaluating to see if they meet my expectations for being worthy friend or partner. That's a huge indicator. If I start evaluating all my relationships and whether they're actually fulfilling my needs or they're good for me, then I'm probably having a problem with receiving. Here's another one. We administer secret tests of loyalty to determine whether to stay in that relationship with someone. So that's a really good key indicator is, am I testing people's relationships with me to see if they're worthy of being in a relationship? I have a problem with receiving for sure at that point. And these are wonderful things because Mark, I know I've been guilty of it myself, right? So, as I'm learning and unpacking this problem in my own life of receiving, I'm recognizing, wow, I've robbed so many opportunities of healthy relationships. But what happens is our heart goes into more like a hiding, but our ego starts to crave a sense of being gratified in ways that will never really satisfy our soul. So we start taking in relationships to a different degree. We start being more demanding. We start putting higher expectations on people. We start almost resisting when people are wanting to give to us. And so, but then our egotistical approach, we become a very miserable person to be around in those kind of situations, right? We all know, and we've all been around takers in our lives to some degree, in some shape, way, or form. Having the inability to feel and express appreciation is something that I'm probably a taker. If I have a problem with expressing appreciation or gratitude for what I have been given, taking the kindness and caring of others for granted, that would be another indication that I'm having a problem to receive, and I'm in a posture of just taking. Leaving others feeling unappreciated. So I have a hard time with giving a gratitude or showing gratitude or appreciating other people's behaviors or even thoughtfulness. Those are some of the key indicators that comes to mind in realizing that I had a problem or have a problem sometimes with.
Yeah, that's so good, Chris. Those are such great nuggets. Again, people share this video out. Like these are like so many golden nuggets in this conversation when you bring it all together. And so I need to even go back and listen to it again. You've just shared so much wisdom with us. When you were talking there, I realized if you demand something and then and you get it, you don't actually have the benefit of the connection that comes from receiving, because you didn't receive it, you demanded it. And so that's a good indicator. If you demand it and you get it and you still don't feel different, if you don't feel like a blessing, or you don't feel like it's kind of like, well, they better have given it to me, then it doesn't change your heart. It doesn't satisfy that connection that we need relationally. Then that's a pretty good indicator that you didn't receive, you demanded. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's transactional.
It's what's interesting about it, Mark, is it's even in the smallest areas of my life that I really is present. When I want a coffee, I'll just do something simple, and I'm 3 minutes away from Starbucks, and the closing is, I'm going to try and beat that closing, and I get there and it's closed. sometimes those demands that I have just on society around me. I expect so much. And so I've realized the expectation goes way beyond even my relationships, in culturally and how I live my life out. And sometimes I think it's just slowing down and learning how to dance again with giving. It's almost like I want to live more intimately with myself.
Yeah.
And I think a really interesting thing to unpack in our lives is we're not very intimate with ourselves. We already know in psychology world and counseling world, loving self has a big part of our therapy, of our growing and our wholeness. And learning how to be intimate with self, being gentle with self, things like that are some of the areas we can grow in, so that we can learn how to be more receptive, even of those things that are awkward and uncomfortable.
That's so good, Chris. I think next season we should do another episode just on that subject, just how to self-compassion, self-care. How do we, because it's true, we're supposed to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. So ourself is actually before the neighbor. It's just spoken after, but it actually is implying that we got to love ourselves first. So we got to, this whole idea of self-love, when we don't, let me put it this way, when we don't experience self-love, then we turn to love of self.
Yeah.
And love of self is actually, love of self is actually what brings pride and arrogance and demand and all those kinds of things. It's actually loving yourself that humbles you. It makes you realize that your value comes from who God says you are, and that you humble yourself and say, "Oh man, I'm just so grateful. That I'm valuable and I can actually love myself." And then that makes me a better person, a better lover of others, right? And so, Chris, thank you so much for today. Like, this has just been so rich. Is there anything, like, we're 4 minutes here, is there anything you just want to leave with the audience that you've left so much today. I don't think is there anything left? I don't want you to go away thinking I left something off the table. What is there one more thing you'd like to say about this subject?
One last, thanks, Morgan. I really appreciate this time. It's been just a beautiful conversation. I think just talking about intimacy again, just bringing us back to curating an environment for intimacy. It's created as we begin to appreciate what we have and what we're given. And while we engage in this loving dance and rhythm of mutuality with people, with other humans, it's absolutely necessary. In the church world, we call it the body, the community, in Christ, beautifully designed to live and operate and function in togetherness and mutuality. We're designed for this. And when we're operating outside of our design, that's where we adopt all these dysfunctions and distortions. We live as fragmented and selfish and individualistic parts, in separation and divided in our intents. And so it's exploring what it means to live and curate an environment for intimacy, both within ourselves, God maybe too, if that's your paradigm, but community as well with mutuality. It's just it's a dance. And I encourage you, let's dance.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, hey, everybody, if you want to engage Chris if you need some counseling or somebody that does, you can absolutely engage Chris by going to simply www.belovedyou.ca. That's belovedyou.ca. And you can go and you can find them there, and I'll put it in a comment here as well as we when we sign off, and then you can just click on it. But actually, maybe I'll just put that in right now.
Mark, just a quick comment on the beloved you. Instead of the YOU, it's letter U, belovedyou.ca.
Sorry, say that again.
It's just beloved you, just the letter U instead of the YOU.
Oh, sorry.
My apologies. I didn't find that. But thank you.
Belovedyou.ca. There, I just put it in the comments so that anybody can link on it. I should have asked that. I thought it was the word you, but yes, that's got to get the web addresses we can get, right?
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, thanks so much, Chris, and thanks everybody for listening. Remember, this is the season finale of Relationship Matters. Hey, that is okay, though. If you've just tuned in today for the first time, go back and you'll see on my YouTube there, Mark Gordon, Relationship Matters. You'll find my YouTube or on my Relationship Matters page, wherever you found us today. you can look back and look over other episodes. You can also go to podcast platforms and hear past episodes. This one will be up on Spotify and Apple and what's the other, Amazon by Monday, and then you can listen to it on the go as well as the other 19 episodes. So this is our first season finished with Relationship Matters. We will be back in the fall with a new season, brand new season with new guests, and I am going to get you back on, Chris, to talk about that self-compassion conversation. As Roberta said, it could be a whole series. It could be. So we'll see. Maybe we'll have a couple of episodes with you. And then, but through the summer, remember, just keep an eye out on my social media, because I'm going to do we're going to do a relationship mailbag with a friend of mine, Drew Stevens, and we're going to just be answering questions, specific questions from you. So feel free to drop me a line. You can go to my website to get a hold of me and drop me a line. And my website's just markgordon.ca. And so you could go to my website and drop me a line and ask your questions. Maybe you can do it anonymously. You don't have to say who you are. Maybe there's a question you've been dying to ask and you've been scared to ask it. But go ahead and find me there. And also, if you need some relationship coaching, you can get a hold of either Chris or I. Chris, thank you again. You're fantastic. I knew this was going to be rich. I told you it'd go by fast too, right?
It does.
And it did. So I'm going to sign off now for everybody else. And thanks, everybody, for joining.